So Hare Krishna. This is we're doing this. This is the third part of the Nectar of Instruction. We divided it into three different parts, and this one I'm saying that it's advanced bhakti and serving Krishna in the mood of the Brijbasis. Actually, the last time I misspoke, I said that the last verses carried us through sadhana bhakti, but that's not exactly true. We're coming to the very advanced levels of sadhana bhakti, and we'll describe that a little bit more during the class. And we're actually, the first verse is going to be talking about the Raganuga sadhana bhakti, a very advanced stage of devotional service and practice. And so we'll try to put it in context with what we've discussed previously. And because what we did before is we heard about how to get started in devotional service, some of the major principles. And that's called Vaidhi Bhakti, or for following the rules and regulations. And so we'll try to put this in context today, and hopefully try to bring some of the concepts that we learned before kind of into focus and to bear on this topic. And so we're starting with text 8, going through 8 through 11 today. We'll finish the book. And since it's the best instruction, the essence of all instruction, as we'll see in the verse. And it's talking, the topic is going to be Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. And Prabhupada talks about in the purport, he talks about there is sadhana, devotional service in practice, and there is sadhya, the imperfection. So Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti is kind of right on the borderline. So as I say, a subtitle is where devotional practice approaches perfection. That's what we're going to hear in text 8. So this text 8 there is on the screen. Tannama rupa charitadi sukirtananu smrityo kramena rasana manasi niyoja tishtan vrajeta nanuragi jananugami kalam nayeda kilam iti upadesha saram. The essence of all advice is that one should utilize one's full time, 24 hours a day. It's akilam is the full or unbroken. Like so you say a full moon is akilam. 24 hours a day in nicely chanting and remembering the Lord's divine name, transcendental form, qualities, and eternal pastimes, thereby gradually engaging one's tongue and mind. In this way, one should reside in Vraja, Goloka Vrindavan Dham, and serve Krishna under the guidance of devotees. One should follow in the footsteps of the Lord's beloved devotees who are deeply attached to his devotional service. And then a quote from the purport, Prabhupada says, the Chaitanya Charitamrita advises those who are neophytes to give up all kinds of motivated desires and simply engage in the regulative devotional service of the Lord according to the directions of Scripture. In this way, a neophyte can gradually develop attachment for Krishna's name, fame, form, qualities, and so forth. When one has developed such attachment, he can spontaneously serve the lotus feet of Krishna, even without following the regulative principles. This stage is called Raga Bhakti, or devotional service in spontaneous love. At that stage, the devotee can follow in the footsteps of one of the eternal associates of Krishna in Vrindavan. This is called Raganuga Bhakti. The next slide is there are three broad divisions of bhakti. So we're going to try to find out exactly where this Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti fits in. Already from what we've read, there's an understanding that it's something that's approached gradually. Right? That you don't leap in there, but we're going to see exactly where it lies. And so here there's three broad divisions. We're going to revisit these in the Nectar of Devotion. That there's sadhana bhakti, and probably that's also devotional service in practice. We understand that that devotion to Krishna is innate in us. It's just sleeping, so to speak. And so, unlike when we try to learn a new skill and we practice it and learn it, we're actually practicing something that's already innate within us. Prabhupada in the Nectar of Devotion gives us the example of a young child learning how to walk. The capacity to walk is built into them. They just have to work it out. fall down a few times, and they can have it come out. So this is something. It's not like learning a new skill as much as it's trying to awaken what's lying dormant. But the first part of it is we have to awaken it. And so there are practices that we've discussed in the last really two sessions about how we can engage ourselves in sadhana and allow us to awaken that bhakti. When that's successful, okay, when you come to the point where the bhakti is awake and kind of operating under its own power, you come to the next stage called bhava. And the bhava stage, or devotional service in ecstasy. So what happens is that that one's the false ego. It says in the Srimad Bhagavatam that the false ego, the knot in the heart, is loosened. That one no longer identifies oneself with the material body or mind. One comes to understand one's true spiritual identity at that time, and also one's eternal relationship with Krishna. And from there, that evolves into prema, or love of God. Okay. So according to the division that Prabhupada gave earlier, I'm calling sadhana bhakti practice, and then the bhava and prema are different levels of perfection, sadhya. Because at that time we know, so there's no longer a practice, it's now moving of its own accord, but there's a lot of levels of perfection. So once it begins on its own, you know, that simply one is driven to further and further love of Krishna. It says it never really stops. We never stop increasing our love for Krishna. Even there's no end point to that. So what we're dealing with today and in the Nectar of Instruction, we're going to focus on the practice part, the sadhana bhakti part. And so this slide, I'm going to divide sadhana bhakti into smaller divisions. There are even smaller divisions available than this, but from what we're talking, and we'll get into that in the Nectar of Devotion, but for what we're dealing with here in Nectar of Instruction, I think this will work quite well for us. So the three sections of sadhana bhakti, devotional service and practice, that we're trying to awaken our bhakti, is I'm calling unsteady. It's anishtita in Sanskrit, steady, nishta, and then Prabhupada uses the terminology spontaneous, and so I've kept that here. And they're important distinctions, and we're going to use this actually to kind of see some of the ways that bhakti develops. By understanding these different steps, we can find ourselves. We can see where we can move from where we're at, and we're going to map some of the other things we've learned already onto that model to see how it works. Hopefully, we're going to get a decent idea today about how sadhana bhakti works, because we have to pass through the stages of that to reach this the higher stage that we're talking about, the upper level of spontaneous devotional service, or raganuga. So I'll give a quick description of these three. From the Madhurya Kadambini, there's a description of 6 characteristics that people in unsteady devotional service possess. And it says the beginning is called utsaha mai, or a certain kind of prideful enthusiasm. The example that's given is that a young child, a young Brahmin boy, Vishnu Chakrabarti Thakur says, when he begins his studies of the Vedas, he immediately thinks he's a great scholar. And so when we take up the process of devotional service, there's sometimes we take up new practices, we have a new vocabulary, we have a new understanding. Oftentimes we dress a little bit differently. At least we add tilak and such things. And we look around, everybody else is looking quite the same and doing the similar things, and we think we're doing what it is. This is what it is. So I'm really making progress. And I don't see a distinction between myself and others. And so, and just like the young child doesn't realize that they're just beginning and there are so many things to be learned and so many others who have learned these things that are to be learned, that we think the same way. And so we think that we're moving much faster than we really are. And then it says that then there's a certain confusion and indecision. We talked earlier, especially in verse number 2, about how we can orient our lives in such a way that we can have time and energy for devotional service. And there are sometimes decisions that have to be made in those things. What are my priorities? And so someone in the beginning stages of devotional service may be quite confused about that. Do I, give it all up and engage in full-time devotional service? Do I, carry on with my business? What do I do? Exactly how do I orient myself in regard to practicing devotional service? And then the third thing is called gana tarala, thick and thin. And like it's in the sense of like we cook down the milk and make rubbery, make condensed milk. It's very thick, but before it's cooked down, it's very thin. And so we'll find in unsteady devotional service, as the name implies, that sometimes we'll feel very inspired and motivated and eager and enthusiastic, and sometimes not so much. And that will fluctuate back and forth, thick and thin. We don't keep a steady focus. And then after that, it says there's the inability, the struggle with the senses. And this brings into view the very first verse. We were talking about how to control the senses, the urges that come out. Right, so we're focused, we're trying to practice our sadhana. It happens, of course, oftentimes when we're, mentally it happens, especially when we're chanting our rounds. We're trying to chant Hare Krishna, and then something comes up in the mind. The urges of the mind come out. Or when we're doing other service, the different urges of the senses might come out and distract us. This is very difficult at the unsteady stage. This is one of the causes of the unsteadiness, is that we're not dealing well with the urges of the senses. We haven't made a good, a successful effort to get them under control. The fifth thing is the inability to improve one's devotional service. So we may be at a certain level and doing reasonably well, a little thick and thin, but we may want to do better, and we should want to always do better. And so we think, okay, now from now on I'm going to do this. From now on I'm going to do that. From now, we find some weakness that we have, and we're going to try to rectify that. And we find out that it's a lot easier said than done. Okay, that's one of the symptoms of unsteady devotional service. And then number 6 is called Taranga Rangani, or riding the waves of bhakti. And so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that that devotional service, bhakti, is naturally attractive. And so someone who's practicing devotional service may want to use that practice in order to gain some attention, either puja or pratishta, position or fame. Name and fame, Prabhupada usually calls it, or sometimes he calls it, what is it, profit, adoration, and distinction. So that we want to be somebody. I want to be noticed. I want to have some position over people. This kind of thing. So instead of diving deep into the ocean of bhakti, we're floating on the waves of the surface and using it in that way. So recognition, praise, this kind of thing happens. In steady devotional service, that's explained in the Shikshastakam in the 3rd verse. What somebody who has steady devotional service, what it looks like. One who thinks himself lower than the grass, who is more tolerant than a tree, and who does not expect personal honor, but is always prepared to give all respect to others, can very easily always chant the holy name of the Lord. So we notice right at the bottom that can always chant. So that's steadiness. That we can remain engaged in devotional service. It applies to not just chanting, but just to our devotional service in general. And that the notion of being very humble means that now we no longer are so infatuated with ourselves, think we're doing so great and we're so wonderful, and we're appreciating more Krishna. So it says we're humble towards Krishna, and that I am your servant, and therefore I will do whatever is required. And I'm not thinking so much about what do I get out of it, is it really pleasant for me, this kind of thing. And the tolerance is that we're willing to accept the inconvenience that goes with that. Oftentimes we discuss this more as just kind of general qualities that we have, and to some extent that's true, but in particular it's humility towards the Lord and our duties, and tolerance in dealing with the things, the unpleasant things that come as a byproduct of that service. And so if we have those two things, there's kind of also, it fits in with enthusiasm and patience, right? I'm very enthusiastic to serve whatever it is that you want me to do, my Lord, instead of, ooh, I'm not so sure, And then the patience means that you're willing to accept whatever difficulties are there. So we talked about that earlier on as well in text number 3. So someone in that situation, they don't have these other 6 problems. And so they don't wax and wane so much. They don't have so much trouble with the senses. They can improve themselves. And what happens is their intelligence grows. In the unsteady stage, we have a purpose. We've decided that we want to serve Krishna, and we really mean it. But we have trouble, right? We're like 2 people in one body. The mind and senses aren't cooperating with us. We're trying, but other forces are working against us. And but in Nishta, these things may still be there. There may be other forces that are trying to push against us. Where we think, no, I know what I want to do, and I'm going to do it. So one can resist the various things. That allows for the next stage to happen, and there's actually 2 verses in Shikshashtakam that describe this. I just went for the first one, the stage of Ruchi, which says, O Lord of the universe, I do not desire material wealth, materialistic followers, a beautiful wife, or fruitive activities described in flowery language. All I want life after life is unmotivated devotional service to you. So at this point, when one is steady, and one can remember Krishna and stay focused in service, what happens really is that Krishna's all-attractive feature can be leveraged very usefully. Devotional service, we know, even in the unsteady state, makes us happy. We feel this higher taste. But if you notice in Bhagavad Gita, it says that one is fixed in consciousness. And we find that we taste the higher taste, but we're not so fixed when we're in the unsteady state. At the stage of Nishta, then that higher taste begins to increase. And so therefore it says, I don't want anything else. You see. So in the unsteady stage, temptations are hard to resist. In the steady stage, they're resistible, but they're still present. You're understanding that's why you have to tolerate. Right? But in the stage of spontaneous service, man, you don't want any of that anymore. You just want to serve. So your enthusiasm goes through the roof. That's why it's spontaneous. On the other places, you're using your intelligence and your understanding. First of all, you're fighting against yourself. And the second one, you're saying, no, I know what I want to do. I have good reasons for serving Krishna. I really want to do it. And you hold fast. In this case, it's just like, it's just so wonderful that you don't want to stop, life after life. So you just want to keep going on. It's not even a question so much of the understanding anymore. It's beginning to flow. It's called taste, ruchi, or taste, when Prabhupada talks about taste. When we have bits of taste now, but when it's concentrated and persistent, then it's a different story. Then the same thing that a little taste that gives us motivation now continues, and it builds and builds and builds. That's why it's spontaneous.
Can I ask a question?
It's a question.
So steady is the nishta, right?
Yeah, it's called nishta.
What is the spontaneous in Sanskrit?
Well, there's 2 parts of it. There's called ruchi and asakti. Prabhupada just used this word spontaneous, and so I've used that particular terminology.
So, spontaneous is ruchi?
There's two phases of it. They're called. It encompasses 2 phases called ruchi, or taste, or asakti, meaning addiction.
Okay.
But I've only seen Prabhupada use a term for both of them together as spontaneous.
And unsteady is like anishta or something?
Anishtita means not steady. See, this just like in English, you preface something with an A, it means not. So nishta is steady, anishta is unsteady. So it's like that. So in our next slide,
What
what is the other verse you mentioned? Two verses. You took the first one. What is the other
Ruchi.
verse also?
There's Ruchi and Asakti. It's text number 4 and 5 of the Shikshastakam. Those describe this. Those are descriptions of what Prabhupada is calling the spontaneous level of devotional service. 2 describes unsteady devotional service. 3 describes steady devotional service. 3 and 4, or 4 and 5 describe spontaneous devotional service. 5 bhava. 6 bhava, and 7 and 8 are prema. That's how it goes.
You told in steady state we know there will be difficulties and we tolerate. So in spontaneous stage there is no difficulties.
The difference with spontaneous devotional service is that the happiness and the enthusiasm that you have for serving Krishna means that you don't hardly take notice of any difficulties. Like a mother, or from fathers also may have to get up when the young baby is crying, right? And of course, it still may not be pleasant, but just because of the love of the child, it's so much easier than if it wasn't something. If there was some other reason they had to get up at that time, if the neighbors were making noise or something night after night, they wouldn't feel so enthusiastic. So when there's real love and real attraction for doing that service, then they don't seem very noticeable. So you're moving from toleration. When you tolerate, you're saying you recognize it, right? You're feeling it. You have to tolerate something. You're feeling it, but then it's moving from tolerating to not even. It's not significant any longer. You may still feel it, but it's not significant. It doesn't. It's not even a question. You just yes, that's it. You accept that. Later on in the stage of bhava, then you don't even feel it. So, but in this stage, it's the happiness of serving Krishna is so wonderful and so that you just don't take much notice of any kind of difficulties that come as a byproduct. So in this stage, we're gonna show this is where we're aiming at in this particular verse, in verse 8, and that Raganuga Bhakti is a special type of advanced spontaneous sadhana bhakti. Prabhupada kind of he kind of puts the two just together. But there's a special. Raganuga means something particular, and you can be in spontaneous devotional service. You can even pass through higher stages and not take up Raganuga Bhakti. So it's a specific subset of spontaneous devotional service, and it comes at the high level. It comes at that level of asakti. Because at the level, and what I have here is this is very advanced practitioners of spontaneous sadhana bhakti will begin to have a sense of their eternal relationship with Lord Krishna. Some of these may have a relationship similar to one of the eternal associates of Krishna in Vrindavan. Such a practitioner will find great inspiration in studying and remembering the mood, characteristics, and service of that eternal associate. So please note that the practitioner does not aspire to be equal to that eternal associate. We don't want to become Mother Yashoda or Radharani. That's not possible. Because that eternal associate most perfectly embodies that specific mood. But rather, we will aspire to join the many devotees who assist that eternal associate, or assist those who assist. That's why we've heard so many times from Lord Chaitanya that we're supposed to be the servant of the servant of the servant. That continues into the spiritual world. That we see in Vrindavan, that Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj are the epitome of parental love. But then there's also all the cowherd men and women of the same age, and they all feel like they have parental affection for Krishna, and that's why Krishna goes and steals butter in their houses to satisfy them, and so they can feel that too, and that's why he. When Lord Brahma steals the cows, the calves, and the boys, he expands himself as them so that they get a chance to experience firsthand. So it says that, but in some sense, when we'll get some sense at that high level of asakti, high level of spontaneous devotional service, we'll understand what our relationship with Krishna is, and if we are in the mood of Vrindavan, when we're going to describe how that's a special mood. The residents of Vrindavan have a special mood that all of the other devotees in the spiritual world do not have. And so if you have that particular mood, then you will follow one of these devotees, and that will be Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, and lead you to Vrindavan and to Goloka Vrindavan. So it's at a very high level of a very high level of sadhana. So next slide. You have is a question?
When you mentioned earlier at the beginning how this is within us, right?
Bhakti is within
Our
us.
original
Yeah.
constitution and position, bhakti is within us, and we're trying to uncover it. So that's very hopeful because we know sometime we'll get there, right? If we stick to the process. But it seems to take a long time, and is that because what we're trying to achieve, or what we're trying to uncover, is just so valuable and so pure that it seems to take time.
Okay, so
It does take time.
to paraphrase the question quite a bit, is that bhakti is something that's innate within us, and so therefore it should be easy. You'd think it'd be easy to awaken it, but yet it seems to take a long time. So what is it? And so you're right. Part of it is it's a question of it being so valuable. So things that are very valuable are worth waiting for. Also, it's a question of applying ourselves in the correct way. I mean, this is a question I've wondered a lot about since I've been a member of ISKCON, and my feeling as I learn more and I look back at my own history is that I think one of the things we haven't done the best job of is knowing how to apply the knowledge that we have, how to apply sadhana bhakti in the appropriate way, and to diagnose what's wrong. Prabhupada says that it's a science, which means it's applicable. He uses it's vigyan, is the Sanskrit word. It means it's something that can be applied. And so he says if something is not working out, you can analyze what's missing. And I'm really hoping that when we take a look at finish this Nectar of Instruction, especially this session, that we'll have an opportunity to look at ourselves, see where we are on the spectrum, see what progress would look like from that spectrum, and then give ourselves a better chance to know how we can move forward. Because Prabhupada said previously, we have to know where we are. He said in verse number 4 or 5. He says we have to see what our own, left 4, 5, I think, what our own level is. And if we can understand what that level is and understand the factors involved in making progress and the things that may be holding us back, we have a better chance of applying the philosophy intelligently. I think we can apply it better, and we can have more success more quickly. I really think it's possible. I think part of it is our own fault. Bhaktivinoda Thakur makes, because he was talking a fairly intense situation where people were living with Babajis and things, but he said that you can go through anartha nivritti, the stage that from transitioning from unsteady to steady in a few days. So I don't know that we can aspire to that necessarily, but I think we can aspire to make more rapid progress than we do. I think we haven't understood as well how the process works and how to apply it, and I think we can do a better job of that.
I took your point, but as Mataji is telling, the more valuable it is, the more it is kept far. But is it because the thicker the coverings of the settled body?
Well, why is it so hard? What keeps us? Well, the real thing that keeps us is our own lack of desire to serve.
Yeah.
So Krishna, he puts us into illusion, and really only he can do that because to anyone whose eyes is open, Krishna is apparent everywhere. He's there as a super soul every place. We're surrounded by Krishna. But by his inconceivable power, we're able to forget. And he does that in reaction to our desire not to serve. And so the thing that has to change most of all, the deep-rooted things, we have to say, I want to serve. And then he also acts to reverse that. He says, you see it in Bhagavad Gita. He says, Mama Maya Duryatya. It's very difficult to overcome, but he can help you. Right? Well, it's like that. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And so the devotees in Vrindavan Leela are unique. I mentioned that a little bit before, that not everybody who are eternal associates of Krishna or of the Lord are the same. There's the category in Vrindavan is special. That's why when Krishna appears, when he appears personally, he reveals this particular thing. And so I've quoted from this is a verse from a translation of a verse from the Madhurya Kadambini, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's explanation of the path of bhakti. And this is at the very beginning. He says, though previous Mahajans, Prahlad, Dhruva, Kumars, etc., have taken up the path of bhakti, I constantly pay my obeisances to Srila Rupa Goswami, the Lord's dear one, by whose mercy one now attains the intelligence to see bhakti in its complete rasa form. And this is referring to the type of relationships that the residents of Vrindavan have. And that means even, the Pandavas in Hastinapur, the other devotees in Mathura or Dwarka, they do not share this same particular deep relationship. Okay? And so, how are they unique? And it says it's natural and proper for devotees to feel small and insignificant in the presence of the all-powerful Supreme Lord. Prabhupada calls it a gulf of difference. I like that term. He says that gulf of difference causes one to approach the Lord in a formal and intensely respectful manner. We see, if you look in Srimad Bhagavatam, and you'll see instances of the Lord Vishnu appearing on the back of Garuda. And he's surrounded by the Siddhas, Charanas, Vidyadharas, all these other celestial beings. And in the West, we call it the heavenly host. And if you saw that, you would know right away, he's God and I'm not. And you would be in full respect. So naturally, when you're dealing with somebody who's far, far superior to yourself, we tend to keep a respectful distance, we say. Isn't it? We say a respectful distance. So that's what we do. Okay, that's the normal situation. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna says that he's not fully satisfied by that type of relationship. He has something more in mind. And so in Vrindavan, he puts his majesty, power, and opulence into the background and reveals his unparalleled beauty and charm. My Guru Maharaj Vrinda Suprabhu says he dials down his opulence and he turns up the sweetness. And so he's the same Supreme Lord, but instead of acting like the Supreme Lord and having all of his attendants and the heavenly host around him and stuff, he appears as a little cowherd boy in a very pastoral environment. It's not like Vaikuntha with all the or even Dwarka with so many palaces and things. And he doesn't act like the Lord either. He acts in a very sweet way. All right? And so what happens is that those devotees, the devotees in Vrindavan Leela are so smitten that their awareness of Krishna's divinity goes into the background. They know to some degree even, but they can't stay in their minds. So if say somebody you really respect comes up to you, and at first, you're going to have that respectful distance, but then they're just so kind to you, and they're so friendly and personable. That wall may break down, and then you may begin to even forget yourself and deal with them in a very one-on-one sort of way. Well, Krishna is you can only imagine how charming Krishna is. He's the origin of all charm and all beauty. So he starts acting. We see it happen before our eyes a couple different times. With his other parents, Vasudeva and Devaki, where he first of all there's one time when Krishna they come back from meeting at Kurukshetra, and the sages from all over the universe came, and they described who Krishna was, and so when they returned back to Dwarka, Krishna comes as he always did and was going to offer his obeisances to his father, and Vasudeva says, I know who you are. I can't take obeisances from you. You're the Supreme Lord. And Krishna he starts talking in all these kind of bewildering ways, and he takes that knowledge away from Vasudeva. He just charms him into it again. Also, when he kills Kamsa, they understand, and then he immediately tells them, "Oh, my parents, we haven't been very good children. We couldn't serve you in any way. And he brings out that mood. You see. So in that circumstance, they're able to see Krishna as a friend, child, or even as a romantic interest. In that way, Krishna is able to relish pastimes where his devotees' love is unfettered and intimate. It says it's based on that relationship. So next up, I said previously in the previous verses we saw how sadhana bhakti develops from like different angles. We had a notion of it, and we saw that there are many changes that happen as one progresses in bhakti. And so we saw in the preface that the nectar of instruction is supposed to help us go from servant of the senses, go dasa, to become master of the senses, go swami. So that's happening that's one of the things that happens. It's also one of the ways it happens that bhakti progresses. And then he says also in the preface that we're supposed to come to the mode of goodness. So I feel this as that of course we start from goodness, passion, and ignorance combined and move towards goodness. That's what's happening as we advance. And then in text 5, Prabhupada mentions the Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama Adhikaris. Right? That those are stages, those correspond to advancement in devotional service. And I put under those two things a couple of main themes with the Kanishtas, Madhyamas, and Uttamas, is that they go from poor relationships to good relationships to great relationships. That's part of the defining. You define the adhikaris in that way. There's actually several defining characteristics, but the ones that really relate to our topics here in Nectar of Instruction are that one, the relationships. We had all those verses about devotee relationships, and then from faith, that they're also defined by their level of faith, weak to strong to immovable, or unshakable faith. And so that's part of what you're going to see as we grow and develop in bhakti. And also from offensive to lessening offenses to offenseless chanting. That was mentioned in the purport to text number 7. And then from no taste for chanting, right? The example was given of somebody with jaundice having sugar taste bitter. And then it's the process that goes up to a natural relish where it becomes very, very tasteful. So these things are happening as we grow in bhakti, sadhana bhakti, and I want to map these out on that threefold division of sadhana bhakti: unsteady, steady, and spontaneous. And why I want to do that is I want to help us to understand how the various texts are connected, how they fit into this, because the whole thing is talking about how we can advance in devotional service. That's what the Nectar of Instruction is about. So how these things come into play. To get a more detailed understanding of how sadhana bhakti progresses, so we understand all the different things that are supposed to be happening. And then to better understand where one stands on the path. Okay, if we see all these different symptoms and how they appear at different parts, we can get an idea of where we are. And to help one better understand how to move forward on the path. Okay, because if we understand all of these different characteristics, this is what unsteady person looks like. This is what a steady person looks like. The spontaneous person looks like. We can look and say, okay, where is the place I can work best to make progress? What is the weak point? My greatest weak point right here, where I'm standing now. What does it look like at the next stage? So how can I do it? So that hopefully this will be we'll have a little bit of a guideline here that we can use and apply in progressing. And so started here with goodness and passion, and in ignorance moving up towards goodness. So in the unsteady phase, the influence of passion and ignorance is very strong. And the whole notion of the gunas is very intricate. We're going to really simplify it quite a bit. And say ignorance is seen in inertia, laziness, withdrawal. We things are unpleasant. We want to escape. People take intoxication when they're heavily in the mode of ignorance. They want to sleep. They don't feel enthusiasm. They feel that life isn't very good. So kind of almost like depression symptoms are there. And so in the stage of unsteadiness, this notion of not having much enthusiasm, being a little bit, inert, lazy, this kind of stuff happens. Also, I'm connecting that to going through the motions we talked about niyamagraha, where you perform the devotional service without the regulations, without trying to advance. Right? You kind of go through it mechanically. This is
Question. Why is it goodness, passion, and ignorance? Why is it not just passion, ignorance to goodness?
there's always a mixture.
Mix.
So there's only ever a change in proportion of the mixture. That's why you no one actually, you can't live only in ignorance. You wouldn't even be able to eat. You'd be so depressed, you would just sleep and you would starve to death. So there always has to be some, and the proportion as we live changes even day to day a little bit. But generally in the unsteady stage there'll be strong influences from passion and ignorance. And ignorance will be the kind of the thing that makes you lazy, dull, and the passion is distractions and desires. Like we talked about in the second verse that atyahara and laulium, right? So there'll be things like that. That we have many. I have different priorities, different desires. I want to do this. That you're distracting us from the devotional service. I'd like to do this. I'd like to do that. And so passion is there. And so those things, and so you can see how they relate to your unsteadiness. As the ignorance comes up, you're going to go from thick to thin pretty quickly. It cuts at your enthusiasm and that sort of thing. So when those you have an
And actually, another example you have given, like for goodness person, like the example of Hanumanji, like he was into passion, he burned all the Lanka, but it was a goodness person. Is that the?
that's how he was humble. Hanuman was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gives this example that Trinada Piece in a verse being more humble than a blade of grass. He says that was an example of that is Hanuman burning Lanka.
Right.
And so now that seems very counterintuitive, since it seemed like he wasn't being very humble and tolerant. He didn't say, that's okay that you've burned my tail. But he didn't do it because he was angry that somebody burned his tail. He was upset that they were disrespecting Lord Ram. And so he was showing them that you can't do that to my Lord. And so it wasn't about himself. And so he was simply did it in the mood of service and not on his own account. Right. So that's why I say that humbleness really goes towards the Lord and what our service is supposed to be, and the tolerance is tolerate what comes about with it. So he tolerated them burning his tail. He wasn't upset about that personally, And he tolerated everything else. Because so when we reach the level of steady devotional service, it means there's a primary emphasis on goodness, that passion and ignorance are going down in a huge way, and as I said, it makes sense since we have distraction and inertia, are enemies of steadiness, and therefore you have a very clear understanding. You see, we understand all the time that we want to serve Krishna, but sometimes when other desires come up, we think, well, it's okay. I'll just take a little break, or it's okay if I do this other thing. It's not so bad. I'll do that. I'll do this, and we're convinced of it. Our intelligence isn't always very clear. The intelligence, our understanding gets overpowered by the mind and the senses. In the stage of steadiness, that doesn't happen. I clearly understand this is what I want to do in my life. I want to serve Krishna. I have all good reasons for doing it. I really want to. And when the passion and ignorance come out, they're not strong enough to make much change in that. So the clear intelligence of goodness allows for the overcoming of laziness and the resistance of distraction. Now, as I mentioned, when that happens, you begin to leverage the all-attractive power of Krishna. And so in the spontaneous thing, you have the remaining traces of passion and ignorance decreasing. In Bhava, it'll be gone. It'll be called Shuddha Sattva, or purified goodness. Then there's nothing. Then there's only goodness. But here in spontaneous devotional service, they're really receding far, far into the background. And so instead of like being able to tolerate or having the intelligence to keep going on despite resistance from the mind and senses, they hardly even make a dent. And so then the one becomes very, very enthusiastic. With almost no laziness and distraction, the higher taste of bhakti blossoms and great enthusiasm takes over. And so it isn't even a question of guiding yourself by the intelligence. I should do this. You just want to. Why would I do anything else? In the stage of steadiness, we're all thinking, I should do this. This is what I should do. It's what I want to do. I have good reasons. In there, it's just like you just do it. You can't stop. Okay? So let's go on to the next slide. For Godasa to Goswami, and like you kind of can anticipate what's going to happen here on this one. The unsteady one says, despite wanting to serve Krishna, the urges of the mind and senses often overpower the intelligence. So the urges of the senses, we're not successful in Krishnaizing them as we were taught to do in the first verse. In the steady stages, the urges of the mind and senses still arise, but they are not often able to break one's determination to serve Krishna. They push a little bit, but no, we don't want to do that. We've been there and done that. I'm doing something different. And then in the spontaneous part, the taste for devotional service is so strong that the urges of the mind and senses for anything else seem silly and have no attraction. He says, I don't want all these things, right? Nadanam Najanam Sundaram, that fourth verse of Shikshastakam. I don't want any of these things. These things are useless. It's even ridiculous to suggest it. Okay? And so then there's very strong control of the senses, your Goswami. Then Kanishta to Madhyama to Uttama. Okay? The Kanishtas, because of their weak faith, it produces corresponding weak patience and enthusiasm. Remember, we had that diagram in that first class where we showed how confidence inspires both patience and enthusiasm. Prabhupada defined as faith, really, that devotional service was the most valuable thing. It was a perfection of human existence, and that it was gonna be inevitable that it would be successful. That Krishna helps us, and therefore we can succeed. So that's our confidence. And so if we think of those two things, right, that it's the most wonderful thing, it's something worth waiting for, right? And that we know that ultimately we will succeed, we can be very patient. And when we think there's something wonderful that's available that we can achieve, we'll be very enthusiastic. There are two natural consequences of that kind of faith. So those things are very closely related to one another. If we have strong faith in those things, we will naturally be enthusiastic and naturally be patient. When we're not very enthusiastic and not very patient, we can re-examine our faith. That's one of the things we can do. You know, we've tried to do this, it didn't work, so now do I have doubt? Is that why? That's why I'm kind of stuck in a bit of a rut. So it says, so automatically that weak faith of the Kanishta makes us not very patient, not very enthusiastic. It also opens the door for competing priorities, like in text number 2. Right? If we don't have really strong faith that Krishna consciousness is the best thing, or that may the only important thing, then we might think, well, I'll keep it on the side and I'll have this and this and this. Those things can come back as the faith fluctuates. Isolation and competitiveness keeps them from benefiting from loving relationships. And we talk about how that's just a basic need. And you will find that someplace. Because they're self-involved. And the inspiration, and of course that keeps them separate from the inspiration that comes from good association. They think that they're already, so advanced that nobody can help them. And their offenses cause their chanting to become less potent. They especially offend other Vaishnavas because of their own pride. So those things are there at the unsteady level. And the steady level is the Madhyama Adhikari. And their strong faith makes them patient and enthusiastic. Their ability to give and receive help allows them to open their hearts and benefit from good association. They are sustained and encouraged by their loving relationships, and being less inclined to make offenses, their chanting is therefore more effective. The Uttama is unshakable faith keeps them patient and enthusiastic no matter what. The Uttamadhikaris are at spontaneous level. Seeing others as being very dear to Krishna, they very easily overlook imperfections in others. We talked about that in verse 6. Their hearts being softened by the joy of bhakti, they are eager to help everyone. Nearly without defenses, their chanting is very, very, very powerful. From offensive to lessening offenses to the nearly offenseless chanting is that at the offensive stage is unsteady. Those of the unsteady stage are highly susceptible to the root offense, which is inattention. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that the root of all the offenses is inattention. We're in a relationship with Krishna. We're calling out to Krishna, and we call out in that stage. We call out to Krishna, "Oh, please, Krishna," and then we don't pay attention to him. We neglect him. So they call out to Krishna while simultaneously neglect him by not paying attention. So and so how can the relationship build? The lessening offenses, because of their steady focus, they're able to overcome the root offense of inattention. See, in steadiness, right, we have that ability to stay focused. We're not all over the place, and so the chanting then can become much easier. We don't have so many distractions while we chant. So they are able to begin to overcome the offense of inattention, and Krishna responds to that. Right? Because we're calling him and we're also paying attention to him when he answers. We invite someone to our house and then they come and we have something better to do. Well, it doesn't build the relationship, it may even hurt it. And in the spontaneous or nearly offenseless stage, offenselessness will come in at the stage of bhava, but near offenselessness. The heightened reciprocation from Krishna in the steady stage inspires a greater and greater intensity in chanting. That's why it's super sweet. Yeah? Not only is there no inattention, but there's great, great deepening attention. So that means that the relationship is building like anything. And the last of them, in the next slide, is the increased taste. And we kind of covered that already. But it says at the unsteady stage, there's some sweetness. Why do we chant Hare Krishna? We've experienced it, you know. Even in the beginning, we all had some experience of it, but it's intermittent. And it's often outweighed by the struggle to fight distraction, restlessness, and drowsiness. Okay, chanting is very nice, but also it can seem burdensome. I have to fight with my mind. I have to fight with sleepiness. I have to fight with all these kind of things to try to get the rounds done. That becomes more prominent sometimes than the sweetness. So we're just trying to crank those rounds out and get them done today somehow. God help me, Okay, so at the steady stage, you don't have to deal with that. You're not fighting distraction, sleepiness, and restlessness. Okay, when's it going to be over? And so therefore, it doesn't feel burdensome. It's nice. And so then, and by having the constant attention, then the sweetness starts to come out more and more and more. Like I said, we access that all-attractive feature of Krishna in the stage of Nishta. And then that causes the enthusiasm and focus brought to chanting at the spontaneous phase produces a greater and greater sweetness because there's that reciprocation with Krishna. The chanting Hare Krishna is not a mechanical thing. It's a relationship thing. It has that dynamic. It's not that by chanting something happens by the chanting. It's that we're calling out to Krishna and he's responding. So it's a relationship. That's the dynamic that's there. So the more that we're paying attention, the more that we're focused, then the more Krishna is also he's ready to respond the whole time. He's just waiting for us. And when we do that, then he reciprocates more and more. Okay. So say, as one makes progress in bhakti, one gradually transitions from one stage to the next. The unsteady practitioner gradually becomes less and less unsteady until gradually becoming somewhat steady. From somewhat steady, one can become steady and then very steady, and so on. We keep hearing in the verses, krama, step by step or gradually. I want to emphasize that if we want to grow, we're not going to wake up today and say, okay, this unsteady thing looks pretty familiar to me. Now tomorrow I'm going to get to the steady stage. These are not discrete steps. It's not like a step function or a quantum thing. They're not quantized. It's a gradual transition from one to the other. And so it just happens at a certain level. Now we call it steadiness. Here we call it unsteadiness, here we call it spontaneous. They transition from one to the other smoothly. It's a smooth curve and not a step function if you're mathematics guys. And so we make progress by transitioning from one to the, in making improvements, starting where we are and making improvements. And next slide says, while it's understood that chanting is the primary means of progress in bhakti, we have seen that many other factors influence the quality and thus the effectiveness of our chanting. So one thing sometimes you'll hear is that we simply have to perform devotional service. And it's true that devotional service removes all negative things and brings out all good qualities. But part of our devotional service are all of these qualities that we've been discussing. Our faith is important. Our relationships are important. The modes of nature we're in are important. And so it's and those things, I said, we say, okay, we just have to chant. But if we don't pay attention to these other things, our chanting will be offensive, and it won't work very well. Right? So we have to see, why is it offensive? Right? So that's why in the Nectar of Instruction we're hearing about all these different things, about the modes of nature, about relationships. These things are all relevant, that you can't separate them. There's not just chanting, or there's not these other things. The chanting is, we understand, is kind of the power that allows for transformation to take place. But all these other things affect our chanting at the same way. And so we can't neglect them and just hope that if we keep chanting, all the bad things will go away. We have to engage these other factors and see how we can improve in those things for our chanting to improve. Okay? So if we want to make progress, it is beneficial to be able to recognize our strengths and weaknesses. If we can ascertain where we are in the path, as well as understanding what progress from that point would look like, it becomes easier for us to understand how to take the next step. Right? So what would it look like if I was better? Right? Here's where I'm at. What would it look like? So can I do something about those things? Right? What are ones that maybe I can make some progress with? Okay. And then if we do that, we have a chance one day to be at this level of spontaneous devotional service, and that sounds so attractive. I really purposely wanted to focus a lot on that verse though, because it's going to be much more applicable to us. And now we're gonna hear about how this Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti works a little bit more, and what's above that in the next 3 verses.
So, from this description so far, like it appears to me that the beginning stages are more difficult than the advanced stages. In a sense, if somehow with our struggle, like if we could cross the initial stages, then the next stages looks easier because the hurdles are looking.
He said that the early stages, so the unsteady stage, is the most difficult, and so to pass from that to the steady stage is the most troublesome and difficult stage. With afterwards, then, because all the momentum we have a lot of momentum in our mind and senses. We've been not serving Krishna for a long, long time, and so there's an inertia, a huge inertial force there, resisting our attempts to change that. Once we get everything moving in the right direction, like in Nishta, then it becomes easier. Right? When they try to turn the huge oil tankers, the ships, it takes them miles and miles and miles to stop, or miles and miles and miles to turn, because they have such huge momentum behind them. There's such an inertia there that it takes a long time. But once it gets moving in the right direction, it's also hard to move it. So in the same way, once we're off the platform of intelligence and more on the platform of taste and eagerness, it becomes easier. Yeah, it really does. I have it on good authority. Okay? Yes.
Looking at all those lists, which is a really good exercise, and then sometimes I would think, oh, maybe I'm steady, and then the next list would indicate some things that were unsteady. And so, is it, as you were saying, it's a gradual thing, so you may be experiencing steadiness in some things, but not quite steadiness in other things, and vacillating between both lists.
You're explaining what I was trying to say. Actually, was that that's why I wanted to do all this. Is that you don't, you're not going to fall neatly into one category, because it said that it's all a continuum, and you're going to have strengths and you're going to have weaknesses. And so by looking at all these details, I hope that we can pinpoint our position better and see where we can make progress. Here's my weak point. Here's something maybe I can do that can help. So that's what I'm hoping that this provides us kind of a resource with. Just like you said, instead of just saying, okay, I'm here. Well, you're probably here, somewhere in between, but if we can identify what, I'm strong at, what I'm weak at, then we have a chance to address it, and I think that can help us.
The other quick point is when you mentioned how chanting is the primary means of progress.
Mm.
In bhakti, but things influence that chanting.
Mm.
And so, what are those things? Those things in that list, or those?
Yeah, many of those things, because we notice that, of course, because the main thing is offenses. That's a huge, but the offensive means also inattention, right? So a lot of it will come from Vaishnava offenses against other Vaishnavas. That's why there's been such an emphasis on relationships here. And we had the one verse text 6, where it kind of gave us the basis for being able to see past the faults that we and others do have, and not make offenses of them. The other thing is all those other things, the modes of nature and lack of faith, cause us to be distracted in our chanting. So it's the root defense and also the Vaishnava aparad, are all important in that. And so they Prabhupada calls it cooking with smoke when it's offensive, on the offensive stage. He says, where there's smoke, there's fire. But it'll take 300 years to cook your breakfast with smoke. So puts it like, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur puts it in a very stark way. He says it's more like just making the sounds of the alphabets. His Holiness Satchidananda Maharaj was saying how he was trying to figure out how to make advancement in spiritual life, and he concluded that chanting was the real basis. And he started to chant more and more, and it didn't have any effect, and it really freaked him out because he was convinced that was the way to do it. And then he came across where Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that if we're chanting offensively, it's like making the sounds of the alphabets. And then he realized it wasn't just the quantity of chanting, but more importantly, the quality that was involved. That's why he's become so involved with japa retreats and things like that. He had that realization. But at first it really freaked him out because he was convinced it was chanting it, but it wasn't working. And he thought, what do I do now?
Well, it's interesting the connection you made that chanting is relationship. It's all a relationship thing as opposed to a mechanical thing, and then that has helped me understand why there's such an emphasis on offenses or offending devotees or offending people, because it comes down to, well, am I the king of the castle and I'm perfect, and get out of my way, or just our whole interaction or attitude towards others has such an impact on our chanting, because ultimately the chanting is about our relationship with Krishna, and it's not really about, we say purifying this and all the other, and that's there, but I really appreciate it.
Well, even, we wouldn't use the word offenses even with chanting. Like if it were just a technique, we would talk about good technique or bad technique. Like if you're playing a brass instrument, you have your proper embouchure. There's a technique for it. But we don't say a proper technique or bad technique. We say offenses because it is a personal thing. There's a relationship between us and Krishna that we're doing with that. So that otherwise it wouldn't be offensive. It just would be poor technique. If you lift weights the wrong way, you'll throw your back out. This kind of stuff. I got a better technique. Where's your form? Come on. They'll tell you. But this would be bad form, bad technique. But it's not. It's not what it is. It's relationship. That's the dynamic. But this is we're calling out to Krishna. Okay, we are going to have to move because we. I wanted to spend time on that, but I was promising you, 9, 10, and 11. Luckily, we can cover it pretty quickly.
One last question.
One question. Okay.
You are explaining steady and spontaneous.
Yes.
And you mentioned Uttamadhikari in spontaneous, making, but even the traces of negative tendencies or offensive chanting will not be there, right? But Uttamadhikari, I am thinking so far like kind of bhava or prema.
Well, there's two ways to use the term Uttam Adhikari. That's the His Holiness Shivaram Swami has taken these from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and I use the more conservative one that deals with faith, because there's ways of, because in Nectar of Devotion, Adhikari means qualification, so it's your qualification for performing sadhana bhakti, and so when it's used in that sense, your level of faith, then that's how the division goes. Up to Nishta is Kanishta Adhikari. Nishta is Madhyama Adhikari, and Ruchi and above is Uttama Adhikari. Now, if you use it as a terminology for spiritual advancement, then it's the same, except they usually then start Uttama Adhikari at the level of bhava. Okay. So then we use it in both senses, and sometimes not very they acknowledge the sense we're using it in. Okay. But here, since Prabhupada also defined the adhikari so much with faith, he mentioned that. I went ahead and used also Uttama Adhikari in that stage, in that sense. It's also more relevant to us, since we're talking more about sadhana. So I said let's why not use it in that sense? We can talk about Baba some other time. Oh, so here we have text 9. It's Sri Radha Kund, the best of all holy places. So Rupa Goswami is talking about if somebody takes up that path of Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, they have understood themselves as their position as a servant, and especially if they're following in the mood of Vrindavan, and especially in the mood of the gopis. He's a Manjari. Rupa Goswami is a Rupa Manjari, so that's why it's especially dear to him. He's revealing his own heart here so much. So he's then saying that we should reside in Radhakund. He's going to tell us the importance of Radhakund, where that mood can be cultivated. So text 9 is was Vaikuntha Janitovara Madhupuri Tatrapi Raso Savad Rindharanya Mudurapani Ramata Tatrapi Govardhanaha Radhakundami Hapi Gokilapate Preman Rita Plavanat Kuriyadasya Rajato Giritate Sevan Viveki Kanaha. The holy place known as Mathura is spiritually superior to Vaikuntha, the transcendental world, because the Lord appeared there. Superior to Mathurapuri is the transcendental forest of Vrindavan because of Krishna's Rasa Leela pastimes. And superior to the forest of Vrindavan is Govardhan Hill, for it was raised by the divine hand of Sri Krishna and was the site of his various loving pastimes. And above all, the super excellent Sri Radhakund stands supreme, for it is overflooded with the ambrosial, nectarian prema of the Lord of Gokula, Sri Krishna. Where then is that intelligent person who is unwilling to serve this divine Radhakund, which is situated at the foot of Govardhan Hill? Okay, so let's take a look at these different categories of. I mean, obviously, even the worst of them, quote worst, Vaikuntha is an exalted spiritual place. Okay, but Vaikuntha, it says they have completely this mood of reverence, and all. They don't have the sweetness of Vrindavan. We don't have that in any measure. It's all the Lord of Vaikuntha is awe and reverence. And so Mathura, they have a combination of both. We see that with Devaki and Vasudeva. Even when Krishna is born, first of all, he appears, as he doesn't appear as a baby. He appears as Lord Vishnu, full size, all his equipment, and they say you've come just to kill Kamsa. And then on one verse later they say, but oh please, hide yourself because Kamsa is going to come and kill you. Now it doesn't make any sense, right? If he's the Supreme Lord coming to kill Kamsa, then okay, bring him on. Call the guy over here. Let's take care of business. Now, but then they switch from the feeling of understanding his power to feeling like he's our child, and Kamsa might kill him. Then they become protective. So they're back. Arjuna does a similar thing. When he sees the universal form on the battlefield, then he says, "Oh my God, Krishna, I've offended you, treated you so familiarly before." So there's hints of both outside of Vrindavan when Krishna appears. The Vrindavan forest is fully the sweet, intimate mood of Vrindavan. There's nothing else, no awe and reverence there. But the pastimes occur there with various categories of devotees. Many things are happening there. Rasalila is happening there also, but happens at the other place too. And so many other things are happening. He's there with his cowherd friends. There's kind of things. Govardhan Hill is a real nexus. My Guru Maharaj calls it the dam within the dam, because there's all the different pastimes are going on there. Cows are grazing there. There's so many different facilities that Govardhan offers for the devotees for all the different pastimes. But again, it's all the different leelas. There's a rasa stali there. There's so many other things. Cowherd boys play there. So many things are going on at Govardhan. It's a real actually, there's a pastime where it's when Govardhan originated in the spiritual world, that Radharani was asking for a special pastime place, and Krishna created it for her. But then Radhakund Prabhupada says, is the site of the many memories of the eternal loving affairs between Krishna and Radharani, Rati Vilas. And only pastimes with Radharani and the gopis take place there. Cowherd boys don't go there. Even when they come, some of the cowherd boys come with Krishna. When they meet at noon at Radhakund with the gopis, they stay on the Shamakund side. They don't come. So that place is exclusively for the pastimes of Krishna and the gopis. That's why it's the sweetest of the sweet. Because there's categories, as we'll see in the next verse, of even though everybody in Vrindavan has the very sweet mood, there's different levels of intensity, and the gopis have the highest intensity. So that's why it's the most rarefied place that you can find. Text 10 is focusing on Sri Radharani, the best devotee of Krishna. Okay. And it compares, actually it starts comparing all different people who are kind of following the Vedas and coming to the very best individual. Kamibhya parato hare priyataya vyaktim yayurajaninas tebhyo jnana vimukta bhakti parama premaika nishtastata tebhyasta pashupala pankaja drishasta bhopi saradhika preshtatavadiyam tadiya sarasitam nashrayet kakriti. In the Shastra it is said that of all types of fruitive workers, he who is advanced in knowledge of the higher values of life is favored by the Supreme Lord Hari. Out of many such people who are advanced in knowledge, jnanis, one who is practically liberated by virtue of his knowledge may take to devotional service. He is superior to the others. However, one who has actually attained prema, pure love of Krishna, is superior to him. The gopis are exalted above all the advanced devotees because they are always totally dependent upon Sri Krishna. It's interesting, they have this Pashupala, the Krishna who's the cowherd boy, Pankaja Drisha, they always have their sight on his lotus feet. He's the Pashupala, he's the controller of the calves. The transcendental cowherd boy. Among the gopis, Srimati Radharani is the most dear to Krishna. Her Kunda lake is as profoundly dear to Lord Krishna as this most beloved of the gopis. Who then will not reside at Radhakund and in a spiritual body surcharged with ecstatic devotional feelings, aprakat bhava, render loving service to the divine couple, Sri Sri Radha Govinda, who perform their Astakaliya Leela, their eternal eightfold daily pastimes? Indeed, those who execute devotional service on the banks of Radhakunda are the most fortunate people in the universe. And the three verses kind of fit together. We won't talk so much about that last section because it mentions it again in the next verse. But we'll talk about here more about how Radharani is the best of all entities, devotees, and best spiritualists. So it says, first of all, they mention that there's the karmis, persons who perform pious activities. There's the karma kanda section of the Vedas. You do things that are right. And Prabhupada says, although such persons may be elevated to the heavenly planets by their pious activities, and although they may enjoy life there for many thousands of years, they nonetheless must return to this planet when the results of their pious activities are exhausted. So, not so fortunate. The result is not so fantastic. Therefore, they're not considered to be very elevated. This is then there's the knowers of the soul, the jnanis. Although one may be accepted as a jnani, or one advanced in knowledge, his knowledge is considered impure because he has no information of devotional service, and thus neglects the direct worship of the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We know from the scriptures that the soul is 1/10,000th the tip of a hair inside of us. But that's only in the material environment. In the spiritual environment, it's no longer that size. And it's no longer that little tiny shape. It's a whole person. We are a whole person. In the spiritual environment, it grows. There's no souls inside spiritual bodies. The body is the soul. See, it's what it is. The soul grows in the spiritual environment. Now it's just a tiny little thing because it's in the material environment, right? So if somebody understands that they're the soul and not the body, but doesn't understand what the soul is, no devotion, it's a dead end street. Right? So it's not good enough just to know that you're a soul, but you have to know what a soul is, and that means serving Krishna. So they're better than the karmis, but they're not so good because it's a dead end. So they may go to the Brahmajyoti and then they'll come back. Then it says the knowers of the soul, the jnanis who surrender to Krishna, are better than all the previous examples, but are considered beginners on the path. Right? They're going to take up devotional service and practice. Generally, actually, it's considered that they usually are going to be called mixed bhaktas. They're Mishra bhaktas. All of the four pious people that surrender to Krishna in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, they are mixed. They have mixed motivations. So they're devotees, but they're not high level. Advanced devotees, the prema ekanishta, Prabhupada he calls it spontaneous, but it's prema ekanishta, those who are fixed in the love of God, the highest level. After taking to devotional service under the regulative principles, again, it's a gradual process, a person may come to the platform of spontaneous love of Godhead, following in the footsteps of great devotees like Narad and Shanaka and Sanatan. The Supreme Personality of Godhead then recognizes him to be superior. The devotees who have developed love of Godhead are certainly in an exalted position. Okay? So people who come to who are advanced devotees, to the level of prema, they're way better than the early practitioners, who are way better than all the non-devotees. But then we're going to come again to the love of those in Vrindavan Leela, are special. And this isn't mentioned so much in the verse, but it bridges the gap here. That because he mentions people like Narad and stuff. So the people that have that special flavor of prema, the Brajvasis are better than even those who have prema in Vaikuntha or some other place, because it's even more pleasing to Krishna. Of all of those Brajvasis, the gopis are the highest because of their particular relationship with Krishna. That the romantic relationship. Prabhupada says, of all these devotees, the gopis are recognized as superior. This is a beautiful passage. Recognized as superior because they do not know anything other than satisfying Krishna. Nor do the gopis expect any return from Krishna. Indeed, sometimes Krishna puts them into extreme suffering by separating himself from them. Nonetheless, they cannot forget Krishna. This is a beautiful passage. Prabhupada says that I think it's he's translating one of Narottam Das Thakur's bhajans, where it says that the relationship between Radha and Krishna can never break. So even though there's cause for it to break, it never breaks. Radharani in the last verse of Shikshashtam says like that. It says, I'm bowing down at your feet. You can pick me up and embrace me, Aslishava, or you can padaratam, trample me under your feet. I'm yours unconditionally, she says. You can go to be a lumpato, a little playboy, and go to all the other gopis and leave me broken-hearted, but I'm yours unconditionally. So the level of love from the gopis is unprecedented. And so Srimati Radharani, Prabhupada says, no one can excel the devotion of Srimati Radharani. Indeed, even Krishna cannot understand the attitude of Srimati Radharani. Therefore, he took her position and appeared as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, just to understand her transcendental feelings. So that's how exalted Radharani is. Even Krishna wants to know what it's like. to be her. Okay? So the best place, Radhakund, best devotee, Radharani. Makes sense, of course. The two together like that. And then it says for Raganuga Bhaktas and beyond, and especially those following the footsteps of the gopis. So they are most fortunate if they can take shelter of Radhakund. So Rupa Goswami is saying that this is the best place for people to cultivate that mood of Raganuga, following in the footsteps of the gopis, because it's imbued with the mood of Radharani. So he says, who would not do such a thing? So if they were in that stage. Now our last verse, text 11, further glories of Radhakund. And I forgot to put the actual verse. So let's. I'll have to read it from here. Okay. Krishna Shochai Pranaya Vasati Prayasibo Piradha Kundam Chasya Munibirabias Tadregeva Yadai Yad Preshti Tar Apyalam Asulabam Kim Punal Bhakti Bhajam Tad Premedam Sakridapi Siras Nataravishkaroti. Of the many objects of favored delight, and of all the lovable damsels of Vrajabhumi, Srimati Radharani is certainly the most treasured object of Krishna's love. And in every respect, her divine Kund is described by great sages as similarly dear to him. Undoubtedly, Radha Kund is very rarely attained even by the great devotees. Therefore, it is even more difficult for ordinary devotees to attain. If one simply bathes once within those holy waters, one's pure love of Krishna is fully aroused. So the other reason why it's so special is that it's dear to Krishna. So Radharani is the best devotee, and therefore the most dear to Krishna. And so Krishna loves that Radhakund. It reminds him of Radharani. Right. And so there's a few points here. It's dear to Krishna. Her lake, Sri Radhakund, is also described by great sages as a lake that is as dear to Krishna as Radha herself. Indeed, Krishna's love for Radhakund and Srimati Rani is the same in all respects, Prabhupada says in the purport. He gives Krishna prema. It is stated that a devotee will at once develop pure love of Krishna in the wake of the gopis if he once takes a bath in Radhakund. Srila Rupa Goswami recommends that even if one cannot live permanently on the banks of Radhakund, he should at least take a bath in the lake as many times as possible. It's also in the purport. It's rarely attained. In this connection, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur writes that even great sages and great devotees like Narada and Shanaka do not get an opportunity to come to Radhakund to take their baths. What then to speak of ordinary devotees? And it becomes a gopi. It says, thus there is no limit to the glory of Sri Radhakund. By serving Radhakund, one can get an opportunity to become an assistant of Srimati Radharani under the eternal guidance of the gopis. So, I don't know if it's, you can't really beat that, really. Is it possible? Okay. So I have a few kind of final thoughts, because we might get a little excited when we read all this. And so it says, as noted previously, Raganuga Bhakti is possible only in an advanced stage of spontaneous devotional service. Our priority should be to identify our current position and use the knowledge provided in the Nectar of Instruction to progress gradually from that point. Srila Prabhupada has frequently warned us about the tendency for jumping over stages of bhakti and trying to artificially access higher stages for which we are not qualified. So it's a wonderful thing, but we have to get there in the right way. Not to cool our enthusiasm, but to sober it a little bit. And then it's also interesting, you'll notice that in our recent tradition, there hasn't been an emphasis on Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, either from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati or from Srila Prabhupada. And we'll encounter sometimes people telling us that without Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti, you cannot enter into the mood of Vrindavan. And it's very clear that Prabhupada intended that we be able to do that, and thought that we would be able to do that by the process he gave us. Otherwise, people will tell you that that's why you have trouble to chant Hare Krishna. Why you're unsteady this is you don't have the higher taste of being a gopi. You need to get into the mood of the gopis if you're able to have enough taste to chant Hare Krishna. So hopefully we covered that enough that you will not be able to understand anything about the mood of the Brijbasis or even anybody with a spontaneous devotional service unless we work our way up the ladder. If we just imagine that we're gopis, we're still not going to be able to chant Hare Krishna. my god sister, one god sister of mine was told when she was a new devotee that he had a couple of different competing groups that were kind of making fun of her for chanting 16 rounds. And when she said that she didn't have time to do such and such an activity, he says, "What are you doing, chanting your 16 rounds?" That somehow, that was, But if you really have any kind of spontaneous devotion, you can't stop chanting. There's no question of having to struggle in any way. So so some notion that you can be beyond that without being able to chant with attention is I mean I don't know what you can say. It's like you're trying to say you're on fire, but you're too cold. How is it possible? Okay, so anyway, so neither Srila Prabhupada nor Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati emphasized Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti in either their teachings or their personal example. You won't see much more of this besides the Nectar of Instruction. So you see, Prabhupada didn't go there and stay. He was preaching all. He said, "I want to die in the battlefield." Nor Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. This is even so, despite it being understood that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was a dear servant of Sri Radha. When you see that's his in his pranam mantra, it's Srila Varshabhanava Devi Dayata Das. And when he was passing away, he asked one of his disciples to chant that the prayer to Rupa Manjari, Shri Rupa Manjari Pada, because he was servant of Rupa Manjari actually. But yet he didn't do like this. He wasn't practicing this Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti. He was preaching and making his mission. And we should understand that when we that when we follow the acharyas, the more recent acharyas will give us instructions more applicable to the current circumstances. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that had said previously that the followers of Lord Chaitanya give us better examples than even Prahlad Maharaj and other historical persons because they're more current. So the same thing with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati and Srila Prabhupada, who followed Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati so carefully. That Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was trying to adapt Lord Chaitanya's movement and make it a preaching movement again. He understood what Chaitanya's mission was. The only pure followers of Lord Chaitanya at that time were the Sangha of Babajis. You couldn't turn that into a worldwide movement, and so it was his job. His father had prayed for a son who could do it, was to show us how to do it. So with his emphasis, the emphasis of our recent acharyas was service to Lord Chaitanya, who's the combined incarnation of Radha and Krishna. No, here's Radharani personified, Radharani in person in Lord Chaitanya. So His Holiness Bhaktichara Maharaj, he tells us that by doing as Lord Chaitanya did, by trying to satisfy him, what did Lord Chaitanya? He was preaching so much of the time. That by doing that, we are following in the footsteps of the gopis. He says this is Raganuga Sadhana Bhakti in an accessible form. And Prabhupada often he used to say sometimes that book distribution was in the mood of the gopis. Right? But he wasn't just exaggerating, because he said that's what Lord Chaitanya wanted. That's spreading Krishna consciousness. That's what the main gopi Radharani was doing when last present, was spreading Krishna consciousness in the form of Lord Chaitanya, preaching. So this and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he says he emphasized his attitude once by driving in an automobile to Radhakund. This is back in the early 20th century. The automobiles weren't even very common. There weren't really roads and things, and because he had debates with some of the Radhakund Babajis over what was the proper way to execute devotional service, and that debate continues to today. And so he drove up there kind of provocatively to show this is what surrender looks like. This is what service to Radharani looks like. By having yukta vairagya, this is the kind of renunciation we have, and the kind of service is to spread Krishna consciousness. Because he had the ability. He'd performed bhajan for some time. He took a vow to chant so many so many rounds. For some years, he was living in the couture. He had that ability, but he decided not to do that. He voluntarily did something else, and he didn't teach his disciples to go do that. And so he very provocatively stated his position on that. So I just wanted to bring that out because we may be challenged at some time that we have no chance to enter into Vrindavan. We're just preachers. That's a lower level thing, something that Lord Brahma does, that kind of thing, and that we need to do something different. But the confidence that Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktivinoda Saraswati is that if we please Lord Chaitanya, everything is possible. And if we don't, I'm not sure if anything is possible. But by pleasing Lord Chaitanya, everything is possible, including entrance into the mood of the Brijbasis. So we've come to the end. I think how far over did we go? We started a little bit late, so maybe it was okay. 12:08. So we probably didn't. Well, we didn't have many time. We had questions in the middle, which was good, I guess. So if there are any more, we can take a couple more questions. But otherwise, we're kind of at our time limit. Again, thank you all for braving the cold and the snow and everything. And coming out, I thought maybe we might have. I knew that my wife was coming from next door, and so I thought maybe that was all we'd have today. So I appreciate the little bit of an audience and your participation. So.
Question about exam, since we finished one book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had to think a bit about how to do these exams because of the fact that they'll have to be open book. Because people are going to be able to take them remotely. We wanted to make this open to everybody, and not have to make people show up. And so I had to think about first. It was kind of puzzling how I'm going to make a test that does some testing, and people can look through they can be sitting there in front of the PowerPoint listening to the lectures and things. And so what I've come up with is I want to try to make the instead of really trying to weed people out, like I said, in the university environment, you take tests to show people to distinguish between people. Especially if you're an undergrad, they want to distinguish between who's going to get into graduate school or professional school and who's not. But I want to have people to be successful. But what I want the success means to me that they understand the material. So I'm going to try to give a test which people will succeed with, but they probably will have to look through the material again. They're probably going to have to put some thoughts together. And so I didn't want to come up with something really, really, really super difficult that people is going to blow them away. Because that's one thing you can do with an open book test. You try to get some really kind of far out questions that they're really going to have to go super deep into it to come up with the answer. And I thought, well, that's not going to be so good. So there'll be a lot of questions, and there'll be kind of short answer essay type things. And I hope that by having to do the test, that it'll refresh and review, and they'll show that they have understood the material. So I want to make it kind of a learning experience, and I'm going to start. I'm starting already to have a little Google document where I'm just throwing down questions.
Okay, so we'll take a break next week and then start a second book, or we'll meet next week.
No, I think we're going to start. We're going to start next week. We'll start the Ishopanishad, the invocation through verse 3.
Okay, and then a test may come.
And it's just going to. I'll when it's ready, I will send a link on the common email that we have,
Okay.
and then people can take it anytime they want.
We won't have a certain
No time,
restricted
yeah.
period.
Maybe after a certain period after the whole course is over, But
you were saying like you will combine both of the books together.
well, I was thinking, but maybe I may not. It may just be even this may be a growing list of questions. I'll have a link to a document, and I'll keep adding questions to it. And and so because eventually to pass the whole course, you have to have the whole thing. And if you only have to pass a certain part of it, then you can only answer those questions. It will be divided into sections. But I think maybe I'll even just have, I'll just maybe, I may have separate documents, or I may just have one gigantic one with sections, So I thought we'd try to do that. So people will have to review their things. they'll have to think about it a little bit. Hopefully, put some ideas together. It won't be just like go to page such and such on the PowerPoint and be able to scribble it down. But to maybe connect things a little bit. But some of them may be easy as that. I always want to make sure that people have understood the material kind of in a clear way. That's really what the whole purpose of Bhakti Shastri is. It's not to distinguish between people, to have a firm grasp of the basics of the philosophy. And so
Is the test going to be timed?
it won't be timed.
Okay.
Because people are going to be doing it at home. So some people are never going to come. So it has to be open book and it can't be timed.
But there will be a deadline to it.
There'll be a deadline. It has to be in by a certain period of time after the whole course is over. That's all I'm going to do.
If you wish to get your certificate.
Yeah, that's the only constraint I'm going to put on it.
We probably would recommend you do the tests. Don't leave them off.
Mhm.
You don't do that because it'll be fresh in your mind now, which is good. And so I'm going to get it out, the first one out as soon as I can. I'm going to start scribbling down notes and.
So the point that you're making is the Bhakti Shastra here is about not just knowing the books, but also the test to help us reflect and actually apply the books, which is really what.
I'm really hoping to make that happen.
Bhakti
Yeah,
Shastri test.
yeah,
Help us to actually be authentic practitioners and
Yeah.
change.
yeah. It's supposed to be useful to us, not just informational. Yeah. So I'm hoping that we're working on that.
I have a